In July 2020, HCL began.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to ACL Vietnam Tech Talk series. And I would like to send my greeting and thank for your presence in today's virtual sessions, understanding the nuances of application security testing, product, and technologies. My name is Senior Marketing, and I'm your host. But now we are waiting for more people to join.
In July 2020, HCL began its journey in Vietnam. It was also the same period when the dreadful pandemic pushed the whole world behind closed doors. But technology came to the rescue and the world remained connected. Thus, in order to ensure regular dialogue, free flow of knowledge, thoughts and ideas, HCL Vietnam Tech Talk series was envisaged. In this HCL Tech Talk series, HCL experts share ideas on technology, future of workplace, connected living, and connected enterprise. The series went live on December 2020, and since then, sessions on various high-tech technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, digital manufacturing, cybersecurity, etc. have been conducted. HCL Vietnam is committed to shape the technology of the next decade today. HCL Tech Talks will keep bringing many such valuable tech talks to your home screen. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. I know a lot of you here have attended our webinar before, and surely you already know about us. But for people who are newcomer, I'm going to show you more about HCLTech Vietnam. As you can see, HCLTech Vietnam started over a year ago, and as on date, we are located in two locations, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. We are serving 30 plus global customers from both the locations. With a diversity ratio of 27%, HCL Vietnam had also successfully set up a university partnership program where we have got over 15 universities. Our focus area for Vietnam is high-tech area, which also includes digital transformation as a key focus area for us. The domain where HCLTech Vietnam is focusing on, from banking, insurance, other financial services, automobiles, or manufacturing, pharmaceutical, medical device, CPG, and retail. And we recruit people who are experienced professionals in Vietnam. We also look at fresh university graduates and also students who are all undergoing their university education in the 7th and 8th semester. In the next 3 years, HCLTech Vietnam is poised to grow to a strength of 3,000 employees to provide services to clients in various high-tech and cutting-edge technology. If you have interest in career opportunity at HCL, please visit our website, hclvietnam.com, and follow our fan page to find out available jobs. And yes, attend our virtual session today. We have Mr. Peter Lee from HCL Software Global SecureDevOps Technical Manager to share the update on AppScan. Peter Lee is based in Vancouver, Canada. He is HCL Global Software SecureDevOps Technical Manager, worked in the application security space for over 15 years. He started with AppScan in 2007 and started of the Watchfire acquisition at IBM, and have been helping clients globally with implementing with application security solutions and the development lifecycle. Peter Lee leads the HCL Global AppScan technical advisor and enablement team to educate customer partners and students on web application security and the fundamental of AppScan. He parallel focused as a sales leader of APAC, Japan, and Greater China Group, brings valuable global technical SecureDevOps initiative to clients. And you may send in your question at any time during the presentation. We will collect and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our speaker, Mr. Peter Lee. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Mai.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so please help us to know more about AppScan, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mai. And good morning, everyone in Vietnam. And it's a pleasure for me to be speaking today in today's Tech Talk series. So today we're going to be talking about HCL AppScan, about how you kind of manage application security inside of development operations. Next slide. So, before jumping into, what is HCL AppScan, I kind of like to kind of start off by talking about the application security space, and hoping that you guys can kind of have a bit of understanding how important it is in today's world with application security. So some of the industry trends that we've done at HCL, we gather some statistics, and we found that 90% of the applications have known security flaws. And so pretty much any web application that you're using have some sort of like vulnerability that potentially could harm, backend database, backend data. It could be very sensitive data that's in the backend, and hackers can take those data and do something with it, right? And on average, many of the organizations that we work with at HCL, it takes them 35 days to really patch these flaws, right, with web applications vulnerabilities. So again, looking for these vulnerabilities are critical, but it does take a lot of time to patch them, right? The other thing is that security breaches are typically happening at the application layer. So a lot of times, people talk about application breaches, and yeah, every time you hear it on the news, it has to do something with application breaches, which is typically 33% that are happening at that layer. Okay, and again, globally right now, as you see, on a annual growth of application security spending, companies are spending about 25% of their they're spending on making sure that their application is secure and they're fixing vulnerabilities. Again, we see this rise of these cybersecurity activities happening all over the world. So again, this is like growing immensely. Okay. Next slide. So again, when we talk about application security, many security folks, including CISOs, when they look at security, most of them focuses on network security. So by default, a lot of people think about having network securities in place and making sure that they have enough, network perimeters so that it helps them to protect their application. But in fact, if you look at the actual data itself, and this is surveyed around 630 companies worldwide, 33% of these vulnerabilities or concerns come from applications itself. So because web application is public facing, some of them are internal facing, but at the end of the day, it can be accessed by the public if it's a public facing website. If it's internal, there's internal hackers as well that are using the application internally that can leak data out. And again, if you have any vulnerabilities on your web application, it definitely presents a risk to the company. And the average breach cost for any company is about $6.5 million USD, which means that one small security breach could be a very big problem for a company. And the litigation charges, the company reputation, the data being stolen, these are all things that could harm a company's value. And again, like I said, this is all happening at the application layer, which a lot of people don't focus on, right? And again, we tend to focus on the network side, but mostly it comes from the application side. Okay, next slide, Mai. So like I said, many organizations now probably 80% of the development costs are spent on remediating these defects, right? These security vulnerabilities that they found. And again, it's just a lot of costs that are that are being spent up front and are spent too late in the development stage. So typically, if if your application's out there in production, and let's just say you're using the banking application in Vietnam, if there's a security vulnerability that is found, it's a very, very big cost to the organization. So again, on an average, 3.86 million could result from a defect left by the organization there. Okay. So again, this is some really known fact that this is why we have to be very focused on the application security side, and this is why we're looking into talking about AppScan in application security. Next slide, Mike. Thanks. So what we really do at HCL is that we really try to help customers in making sure that they can find security vulnerabilities early in the software development lifecycle. So one way to really think about this is that if you think about the analogy of building a house, right? When you're building a house, you have the blueprint of the house, you build the foundation of the house, and you have the piping for the water, and you have the electricity wires, and then you build the drywalls, and then you build the structure of the house and the roof and everything. If the house is complete, and then later on you find out there's some issues with the plumbing, then you're gonna have to tear apart, the house that was just built and fix it, and then put it back together again, right? So the cost on that is quite costly to do that. So, this is a reason why we want to catch these problems early before the drywalls goes up, before you renovate the place, right? Everything in terms of foundation and pipeline and wiring all have to be, flawless, right? So that's the same idea when it comes to application security development, because when you're coding, right, if you find a defect early in the software development life cycle on the left-hand side during the coding phase, the defect is about $80 to fix per defect, right? If you move down to after coding, where you build the application and you're testing it, the cost can increase, right, from 240 all the way to 960 per defect. And then once you put it into production, meaning the website's live and the customers are using your website, after that, if you find a defect or a vulnerability, the cost to fix that is quite expensive for a company. And so this is why we want to, when you're building the application, when you're coding the application, you want to be looking for vulnerabilities and making sure that you eliminate those before it gets to production. Okay. Next slide. So at HCL, we really help with, not only, application security testing, but we help with the application's software quality in general, right? So recently in the IDC MarketScape report, HCL, HCL SecureDevOps have been named as one of the leaders in this space, and AppScan is one of the tools, part of the tool for security testing, and also for part of the quality testing. And this is where really we kind of help organizations around the world with this. And like I said, we're the leader in this space, and we help with making sure we build quality software, but also secure software. Okay. Next slide. And to kind of zoom in into the product set itself, specifically looking at SecureDevOps, we have HCL AppScan, which is a application security testing tool. This tool has been named the second year in a row as the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We lead in this space for many, many years in the past as well. And again, this is because the fact that we help customers and organizations look for vulnerabilities out there in their application, and the tool lets them know how to fix it. The other thing is that we combine a lot of different innovative technology like machine learning, AI capabilities to help find these vulnerabilities, and as well correlation. We do a lot of correlation between different technologies of scanning for web application security. So again, this is something where we are the leader in this space and have been named the leader for the Magic Quadrant. Okay, next slide. So that brings us to SecureDevOps. So what does it mean at HCL when we talk about SecureDevOps? So SecureDevOps comprises of a solution, an end-to-end solution that helps the development operation, right? So whether you're talking about coding an application starting with version control, so you need to have like a version control to keep the repository of your source code, all the way down to building the application, and then going into what we call the quality assurance phase, where testing. So we have HCL One Test, and then all the way down to security testing, which is HCL AppScan that we're going to talk about today, and then down to launching the application. So you want to launch the application and be able to to put it into production, right? And then lastly, HCL Accelerate helps us to kind of look at the overall value stream management, meaning that, does our development lifecycle look okay? Where does it help us to optimize the development operation in this whole kind of the schema here, okay? So again, this is why we talk about development operation, and this is how we help with, secure DevOps in this space, okay? And really, that's where you put security into development operation, and AppScan is kind of what we're going to be focusing on, the security part instead of the development operation you see here. Next slide. So at HCL, we have a lot of end-to-end technologies for application security. So we have pretty much everything that you're looking for in terms of looking for different types of vulnerabilities and being able to cover all aspects of application security. So we have static analysis scanning. We also have software composition analysis, which looks at third-party software libraries that are vulnerable. We also have interactive analysis, which is a little bit new that we'll talk about. We also have dynamic analysis, which is the most common scanning for web application scanning. Okay, so all four of these technologies are inside of HCL, and this is what we're kind of going to look into and dive a little bit deeper on. How do you choose some of these technologies for different purposes of application security, and how do you manage these vulnerabilities after you found these defects from these technologies here? Okay. Okay, next slide. So AppScan has been around for quite a long time, for many, many decades. As you can see here, we have a full breadth of technologies or product set that helps us with application security, right? So on the cloud side, we have services that we can cloud services that can help with static, interactive, dynamic, and open source. We also have the on-premise solution to help enterprises with same thing, dynamic, static, and interactive analysis. And we also have a community edition developed for developers to integrate into their IDE, right, into their Visual Studio Code IDE. And this is a free component that you can download and use and try out, because this is where we help contribute to the security community and help people to be more secure in coding. Okay. So again, we do offer that end-to-end solution to many organizations that we help in the world here. Next slide. And then the ultimate goal here is that, all these tools that you see, right, they integrate into the development operation, because when you're talking about software development lifecycle, when you're developing an application, you have lots of tools, but with lots of tools comes with the fact that you need to build security as part of this, this software development lifecycle. And all the different end-to-end tools that you see with AppScan can help in different areas, right? Whether it's in the coding phase, whether it's in the build phase, whether it's in the development phase, right? Different phases we can kind of integrate to and help you scan for vulnerabilities, right? The more we look for, the better it is before we put the application out into market. Okay. Next slide. So we're going to talk about introduce the first technology, and for those of you that are new to application security, the first technology is called dynamic analysis, DAST. So at a high level, how this works is that you got to understand the web application architecture. So a lot of us will be using the browser, right? A lot of you guys will use a Chrome browser, Firefox, and you do your internet banking or you're browsing Facebook or something. When you're browsing things, data goes over the internet. It goes to a firewall, and then the firewall lets the data to the backend applications servers, and the application server is where the application sits. Where the application sits on the application server, it talks to the database in the backend. So if you need any type of data, it will talk to the backend database. And backend database is usually where the sensitive data are. If you're talking about banking, that's where the customer information are. There could be customer credit card information in the backend. There could be social insurance number stored in the database. This is where the critical data are stored. So really, to understand the weaknesses here and to understand why 33% of the vulnerability come from web application is because it's the easiest for hackers to get to, right? Applications are public facing, is sitting right in the web application server. So if you have any sort of vulnerability on your web application, it's a direct access to your database, right? Which means that obviously data still has to go through the network protection. So no matter how protective you are with the firewall or the network protection, you got to let data go through. Once that data goes through, and if it's bad data from a hacker, that hacker can actually hack the web application to get any sort of sensitive information from the backend database. And this is why it's so critical to look at the web application vulnerability. And this is in turn why we scan for these vulnerabilities on your web app. Okay, because again, it shows that how integrity is your application, and is there any loophole to get to the backend database. Next slide. So this is exactly what the dynamic analysis engine do for AppScan. We call it the hacker in a box, because you're really getting a application security, automated application security engine to mimic a hacker. So what we do at HCL is that we have research and development, where we develop a lot of these what we call security test rules. These test rules, test policies have a lot of what we call payloads, and these are malicious payloads that can test the web application for vulnerabilities. So we'll be sending like a manipulated kind of value or payload to the application, just like a hacker would do. And then we'll see how the application reacts. If the application reacts and comes back with a response, then we know that there is a vulnerability on that application that we can exploit, right? And so this is why this AppScan DAS engine is so popular, and this is what the reason why that the AppScan engine is so powerful, right? Because it acts as a hacker in a box, an ethical hacker, actually, so to say. Okay. All right, next slide. So with dynamic analysis, it's very much black box, which means that we are testing the application without actually needing to look at the source code. We're testing the application as is, and we're sending payloads, we're sending security policies to it to test for the vulnerability. But let's take a look at it a little bit more deeper using other technologies, scanning and AppScan. So we have another technology called interactive analysis, IaaS monitoring. And this is something that's really new to the market right now. So with the interactive analysis, security testing, just think of it as a security camera, right? It's looking at it from an outside perspective, but at the same time, you're able to see internally what's happening inside the room. So the security camera is actually monitoring to see if there's any malicious activities, and we're able to pinpoint down to where that problem is because we can see inside the room where the problem resides. Okay, so next slide. So the analogy here is that if you think of a experienced mechanic, right? Experienced mechanic is going to look at from a black box perspective by using dynamic analysis, for instance, looking at the outside of the engine to see what the problem is. So maybe there's some fuel leak, there's some leakage somewhere, there's some problems from the outside engine. And from there, we can diagnose and probably try to guess where the problem is inside the engine, right? Now, another way to look at it is to use the far right, the car schematic, which means that we're looking at the engine from the inside. So we may have to take apart the engine, look inside the engine to see where the problem is. So that's where you're looking at it from a source code perspective, which is called static analysis. And in the middle, this is the new one we're talking about, the IAST technology. The interactive one is where you plug an OBD scanner and you plug that into your USB port inside of your car. And we use software to diagnose to see whether there's any issues. And we can look at it from a deeper detail perspective rather than looking at it from the outside of the engine. We can now look a little bit deeper using the USB diagnostic test, right? So that's exactly what IaaS engine do, is that it uses a little bit of the dynamic and static approach and combine it to look for the vulnerability. Next slide. So how it works is that you put an IaaS agent, so this is a monitoring agent, on top of your application server, and it just sits there monitoring to see what's going on. Okay, so next slide. And so the agent actually does nothing when it's sitting there. So what has to happen is something has to happen, right? So just like a security camera, you're gonna put the security camera in a room. If nothing's happening, then you capture nothing. But so that means we need to use something like a dynamic analysis scanner that we just talked about, and crawl the application and look for the vulnerability by using dynamic analysis black box to send payloads, to send traffic to the application server. When you do that, you activate the IaaS agent. The IaaS agent now can see things happening in the backend, because now the IaaS agent will be able to see traffic that's coming in from the dynamic analysis and is able to see what's happening and what's being tested. So in this case, if you look at it from this perspective, the IaaS agent can tell a little bit more through that security camera to the end user on what the problem is, right? Next slide. And again, so you must combine the dynamic analysis testing, or maybe you're doing like a functional testing using, say, one test, HCL one test, or functional tester. And if you're doing an automated test, you're activating the application, and then the IaaS agent will now be active to monitor to see what's happening. Okay, and then from there, we can find out what vulnerabilities there are. Next slide. So again, the use case for this is really for you to like basically try to shift left. So making sure that you have the developer start from looking at vulnerabilities from a more detailed coding perspective. So with using IaaS, it really helps you to automate the test through functional testing or automated security testing. But at the same time, it's monitoring to see if there's problems for you. And this actually goes to further down left of the software development lifecycle. Okay. Next slide. We also do a correlation, which means that we take static analysis and dynamic analysis and we correlate it together. So, we can take two different approaches combine it and correlate it so that we give you a more detailed and more specific, pin down vulnerability issues. Okay, next slide. And again, the benefits of this is that it helps you to kind of prioritize your findings because there's might be a lot of vulnerabilities, lots of defects, but at the end of the day, which one do you fix first? So using IaaS correlation can really help you to figure out what to fix first. And it also helps you to figure out, what are some findings that are not as important, and to really pin down in the stack of issues, like which one is going to present more risk to the organization. Okay, next slide. So from a dynamic perspective, IaaS perspective, there's two different technologies of looking at vulnerabilities. The third one, this is more closely related to developers, right? And really closely related to source code. So static analysis is where we scan the source code itself. Okay, next slide. So with static analysis, when you're choosing a static analysis tool, this is where language really matters, right? Language, what language you develop in, what language you're scanning in. The static analysis tool is very language dependent, right? So when you're looking at it, you have to look at what type of languages it supports to scan. It could be in Java, it could be in Groovy, Visual Studio, PHP, right? It could be in a lot of different type of languages. And at the end of the day, you got to look for a tool that can really support most of the languages out there. And of course, with HCL AppScan static analysis, we support a very broad and very in-depth set of languages, as you can see here. And this is just a subset of it. We're just showing a subset of it. We definitely support a lot more than this. Okay, next slide. So static analysis is very theoretical, right? Because now you're looking at it from a code perspective. And how it works is what we call the data flow analysis, or the taint analysis, right? And the taint analysis, or what we call data flow, is really to look at what data comes into the source code, where does it get flown into in the source code, where does it get executed at the end, right? So for instance, data could coming from a web browser. So you're browsing a website, it's coming from a browser, right? It goes into your source code and it does some things, and then it might be reflected back to you as a user on the web browser again, right? Data comes back to the web browser again. Maybe the data comes in from the web browser and it goes to look for something in the database. For instance, you're trying to log in with your username and password. Your username and password will now be validated in the database to make sure that you are in that record to authenticate into the page. So in a way, there's so many different ways of data coming in, and we never this is what we call sources. We let the source of data come in and we figure out where it ends up, right? If it ends up in the database, it could be called what we call the SQL injection. If it ends up in a web browser, it might be a cross-site scripting vulnerability. And these are all different types of vulnerabilities that a hacker can manipulate the data coming into your source code, and then your source code is get tricked into giving data back to the user because you're not validating what the data is, right? If the data is coming in and the source code doesn't validate that it's a good data, then most likely the source code could be tricked into giving sensitive information back to the user. Okay. And this is why we do static analysis scanning, to really go down to the root cause of the problem. Next slide. So again, when it comes to scanning static analysis, you want to know whether do you want to compile to run a scan, or do you not want to compile to scan. So compiling to scan is going to be a lot more detailed. It's going to be giving you a lot more vulnerabilities. But at the same time, it's going to be very noisy. So it's going to give you a lot of false positives when you compile and scan. The source code only scanning, which means that you're only scanning the source code as is, without compiling, it tends to scan faster, but at the same time, it's not as accurate. But it's good enough for you to pinpoint down some specific vulnerabilities that you can look for, right? So again, there's two different ways. So, whenever you're looking at a static analysis tool, make sure the tool provides both ways, right? A source code only scan or compile output scan. Next slide. So again, with static analysis, it's very simple. You're giving the source code on the developer side, right? It's sitting on your developer desktop. You can run it in the cloud if you want, or you can run it on your desktop if it's an on-prem solution. And either way, you're going to get the results back, and you're going to be able to pinpoint down where the problem is in your source code. And for a developer, they will understand how to fix it, because we do provide those remediation, and we do provide some best practices of how to fix some of these vulnerabilities. Okay, next slide. And we also have, we just looked at DAST, dynamic analysis, interactive analysis, static analysis. The fourth one is the open source scanning. And this is where this is very common. Everyone uses open source libraries, right? So if you're a developer in this, tech talk, you'll understand that you'll be using a lot of open source libraries when you're developing applications, developing your source code. And those open source have vulnerabilities as well. So next slide. So we help you to look for all these open source libraries where there may be potential vulnerabilities. And if there are, we will tell you that you should be using a different set of libraries or an updated version of that library. And this is very important because, there's a lot of these vulnerabilities out there, very, very sensitive vulnerability is because they're using a vulnerable library in their source code, and hackers can exploit that very, very easily, right? Next slide. So again, it's very critical that you kind of do open source scanning as part of the static analysis scanning, because while you're scanning the source code, you would also want to scan your open source, right? So the open source library is packaged with your source code. At the same time, you can do the static analysis scanning, and you can also do an open source scanning as well. Okay, and again, the more coverage you have, the better it is to help you to reduce the risk for your organization. Next slide. So, all these different technologies, you will be choosing which technologies to use. Sometimes you can do a mix and match of a dynamic with static, or IaaS with dynamic, or maybe IaaS with open source, right? There's so many different combinations that you can kind of mix and match with these technologies. But really important point is, how do you do scanning inside of your development operation, right? Next slide. So at HCL, we have a lot of extensive plugins. And the reason why we have plugins is because we help you to build it into your development process. So in the software development lifecycle, you want to build security into the different process, right? Whether it's building it during your continuous integration and continuous development. Maybe you're building it into Jenkins. Maybe you're building it into your GitHub repository. Maybe in your IDE when you're developing applications. These are all possible places that you can do security scanning, right? The more places you do it, the better it is, because it really helps you to cover all areas and aspects of development operation for security. Next slide. So again, we have something like example Jenkins integration. So if you're doing a build of an application, we can run a static analysis scan, a dynamic analysis scan, or an open source scanning. So it doesn't matter. You can choose whichever technology you want to run, but you can run it, right after you do a build. Okay. Next slide. Same thing. Another example is if you're using AWS code build, we can also build AppScan security scanning into that part of that process. So it doesn't matter, if which CI/CD tool you use, we can always be part of that process to help you to make sure that your application is secure. Next slide. And then finally, you want to also look for, tools that have built-in machine learning or AI capabilities. So in AppScan, this is where we have, AI capability built in. Next slide. So our AI capabilities built into our engine for static analysis is because, again, you're going to have a lot of findings and you're going to have a lot of false positives and false negatives. So with all these false positives and false negatives, if you recall to the first slide that I talked about, organizations spend 34 days on average to fix these vulnerabilities. And typically it could be more than that because you're spending a lot of time doing triaging, right? Which means that you're trying to figure out what is true finding in these engines, right? All the engines are not going to be perfect. They're going to have some false positives. So we take away that time for you to do triaging by building a automated AI capability to help you to speed up that process, right? So again, not only you're looking for vulnerabilities, but you're also having to triage, and we can reduce that time for you. Okay, so it's pretty effortless, but again, that machine learning has been built in, so we can leverage that AI capability inside of the engine. Next slide. So, so I want to talk about, in general, how do we, after kind of looking at application security, different technologies, how do we put this into perspective of how this helps overall in your application security kind of discipline, right? So next slide. So, at the end of the day, you want to collect all these different type of findings, whether it's using dynamic, static, cloud, on-premise, open source, right? IaaS. It all needs to come down to a central database to manage these vulnerabilities. And it also requires you to have a dashboard. It requires you to have a place so that everyone can manage the findings from different technologies that you put in place. And this can really help you to kind of figure out how you guys are doing as an organization, whether you are fixing the vulnerabilities, how close you are to production without having security flaws. And again, we help the customer with our AppScan enterprise server to collect these, vulnerabilities and be able to build some report and trend analysis so that, customers can actually manage their application security program. Okay, next slide. So again, at the end of the day, you got to have some measurement against what you're testing. So tools are tools, but tools have to have some sort of governance, right? So you need to have governance in place, which means that, are there any types of, industry standard that you're trying to adhere to? So if you're handling credit card information, maybe you need to adhere to PCI. Maybe as an organization, you have some privacy laws that you have to follow. So perhaps you're scanning for any privacy issues. And maybe perhaps you're just scanning for, say the general OWASP top 10, the open source web, open web application security project, right? The OWASP top 10. And, other places in other geographies have different compliance standards that you're adhering to. And this is where, you want to set that, governance in place. And once you have that governance in place and everyone has a goal to, to look towards to. So when you're scanning, you now have a goal to work towards to, right? Because you're scanning for vulnerabilities, but you're also scanning to be compliant with a certain, industry standard. Okay. So this is why at HCL, we help customers to not only bring in tools, but we bring in tools to help them with continuous security and to continue looking for vulnerabilities throughout the entire program and making sure that they build not only the best quality software, but also provide the most secure and flawless software to be out there for your customers to use. This way, clients that are using your application or using the organization's application feel safe, and we protect, the organization's reputation of, having a security breach, right? Okay, next slide, please. So coming back to AppScan, again, HCL does provide the full end-to-end AppSec portfolio. We're one of the very few, maybe if not the only, that provides the full end-to-end technology stack from, from dynamic analysis down to static, open source, and IaaS. And we have both the options of doing cloud scanning or on-premise scanning. And like I said, this is where we really help the community to bring in some community editions so that people get started with scanning. And honestly, this is where, this is where we really help the community out there in building a better and secure application. Next slide. So again, I think you guys all know this, but HCL again, it is a company that builds around around innovations, and HCL AppScan has a lot of innovation that's built into this organization's R&D. So with our R&D, we always come up with a new innovative way that goes into our tools, which helps us with looking for better ways of looking for vulnerabilities out there. Okay, next slide. And of course, as a software company, this is where we have a lot of software products. This is one of many that you see inside of HCL technologies. And definitely we have a lot of global presence everywhere. AppScan's being used globally everywhere that you see. It's a well-known product for, let's say, like I said, over a couple decades. And anywhere you see, you'll see people know this brand called HCL AppScan. Okay. So again, appreciate everyone's time today, but hopefully you guys enjoyed the session and kind of had learned a little bit about application security. So Mike, over to you.
So thank you, Mr. Peter, for sharing your expertise. That was very insightful presentation. So now let's move on to the Q&A session. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the comment box. Yes, it looks like we have a few questions. Our first question is from Nam Nguyen. He asks, can one scanning technology cover all vulnerability? Please.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. No, one technology does not cover all the vulnerabilities because, again, like I said, different technologies look for different things and different angles of things. So if you're looking at it from a dynamic perspective, dynamic scanning, sometimes it does not catch things that are from a static perspective. So if you're scanning the source code, you're going to find things that you're not going to find in dynamic. Same thing with open source, right? If you're looking for open source libraries, it's not going to look for other things like dynamic and static scanning. So no, it is always best to have different technologies when you're scanning, and all the technologies complement each other. That's one thing that everyone should kind of learn, is that dynamic, static, IaaS, open source, they all complement each other. So that's why you saw the Venn diagram that I show you. The intersection of it, there's some overlaps, but the Venn diagram really shows you the fact that you need to use all technologies to help cover vulnerabilities. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, well, what are ways for organizations to get started with web application security program?
Yeah, so that's another very good question. So a lot of our customers that we work with may have some sort of tool in place. Maybe some organization are quite new to the space and have no application security program. And one thing we like to get them started is start with the dynamic analysis, right? Starting with black box scanning. It's the easiest for customers to get started because it's the easiest to understand, it's the easiest to deploy, and it's literally, like I said, a hacker in a box. So you point and shoot and you look for vulnerabilities on your web app. And then from there, it's an educational thing too. Like our tool provides a lot of remediation assistance. So meaning that it does provide you with a list of best practices of how to fix a particular vulnerability, and many organizations start learning from there as a security program through the tool itself. So the tool is not only helping you to look for vulnerabilities, but it's an educational product that helps your organization to get started in application security, right? And once you have application security from a dynamic analysis perspective built, then you can slowly move and shift to the left and start introducing, say, static analysis, interactive analysis, and then open source scanning, right? And these are technologies you can add later on once your organization is getting good with, starting with dynamic analysis. Okay. So the next question here I see on the screen is how often should organizations scan and remediate? So there, it really depends on every organization because different organizations scan in with different timelines. So some organizations scan monthly, some organizations scan weekly, some scan nightly. It really depends on how often does your organization want to scan, because at the same time, what really matters is what is your development life cycle, right? If your development life cycle is quite rapid and quite fast, so that means you're putting out new versions of the application. Like for instance, Firefox web browser used to have constant updates every other day. Then maybe you should be testing quite often, maybe even by the hour, right? But that's the thing. It's like, it really depends on what application that you're testing. How often do you release those application? And before release, you may want to test with, AppScan or something. And this is where you can, define and schedule to say, I need to scan this, once a month, or maybe I'm scanning this, regularly on the weekly basis, right? And maybe the goal is to scan once a year to do an end-to-end scan. Who knows? That's something that an organization will have to kind of decide on their own. Okay, but we do help with giving some advices on that, but we also help with making sure we help put those plan in place for you at HCL Technology. Yeah. Okay. All right, the next question here is who are the users of web application scanning and who's responsible for app security? So yeah, very, very good question on this too, but the users of web application scanning typically points to the security people, right? So security folks usually use it. But nowadays, we see more and more developers getting involved because organizations are now more mature and they want to, like I said, look for vulnerabilities ahead of time. So in this case, we really want developers to be involved. And so this is where, if you look at static analysis, developers use more of the static analysis tool. And then you have the security, because the security folks or maybe the security auditors using the dynamic analysis scanning for later in the stage of the SDLC, right? Who's ultimately responsible for for app security? This is typically the security team, and typically the security team isn't a big team. It's maybe one or two guys, not more than 5 or 6 or 10. Usually you'll see organizations with small security team and they're responsible for it. But in my response, it should be everyone is responsible, right? Everyone should be a stakeholder in application security program. This is the best for you to make sure that the application is going to be produced and secure, because in a way everyone's held accountable for it, right? First, the developer needs to be doing their own scanning and static analysis. You have QA, quality assurance people that are also running the scan for dynamic analysis. And then you have security auditors that maybe do a full end-to-end scan or maybe do a bit of pen testing. And then before pre-production, right, doing a full end-to-end scan as well. So again, throughout this whole stage, you have this whole development life cycle, everyone is responsible for it, and that is where the organization become much more mature in their security program. Okay.
Thank you. So I will choose one more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Where can we get a trial of AppScan and assistance?
Yeah. So AppScan can be, you can do the trial of AppScan from the HCL AppScan webpage. So if you Google HCL AppScan, you will be able to find the AppScan trial page there, and from there you can kind of download the trial. Uh, you know, the download of the trial allows you to scan our demo website. So we do have a vulnerable website that's out there. It's called Arturo Mutual, or what we call it demo.testfire. And it's very interesting. It's got a lot of planted vulnerabilities intentionally inside of that application. So you can use AppScan to scan that for free, right? But if you want to scan your organization, doing like a proof of concept, then you can always reach out to us from the webpage, where you can request for assistance, and then we can get you kind of a full trial for AppScan with you being able to scan your own application, and being able to test out to see if there's any vulnerabilities on your application itself. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So we appreciate you still being here. One more time, thank you, Peter, for your wonderful presentations. I hope that today's event will bring you useful knowledge. If you have interested in career opportunity at HCLTech, please visit our website, hclvietnam.com, to find out available jobs. And on behalf of HCLTech Vietnam and our presenters, thank you for joining us today. And this is a slide of HCLTech's new brand identity, which was unveiled earlier this month. I want to show you something.
Progress. It comes from having a clear objective, a goal, moving forward unwaveringly towards success. It can be fast, it can be slow, it can be disruptive, but one thing it can't be is stopped. While progress might seem inevitable, breakthroughs come from supercharging it. Delivering at scale, fulfilling aspirations with compassion, innovating responsibly.
And thank you for joining us today. Have a great weekend. Bye.